some breaking news on the situation in Plymouth, where we've been reporting on tonight's programme that a protest and counter-protest has been underway. 3 police officers have been injured, bottles and stones thrown at anti-riot police. We will bring you more on this as we get it here on Times Radio, but it appears the situation in Plymouth, where the City Council is advising people stay away, has turned violent. Let's just turn back now to the discussion at hand. We're talking about the situation across the country, not just in Plymouth tonight. But Jerry, interesting to hear from our listeners in response to what you've had to say so far tonight. And as ever, Times Radio listeners, quick off the mark to share their thoughts. Text 87222 and start your message with the word Times to get involved. As Stephen has done, saying yet another straight middle-class white man telling minorities they should suck it up as it's free speech. Just typical. What's your response to that, Jerry?
Well, that free speech is an essential feature of the liberal democracy that not just I, as a middle-aged white straight guy, whatever, but the whole of the country has grown up with and has been used to, and we've done that because we believe it's the best way to order a society. Free speech is an incredibly important part. And I just wanted to be clear, and again, I agree wholeheartedly with Claire. But again, what we need to be clear about is a very, very important distinction between direct incitement to violence and statements that may be inflammatory, that may be false, that may be offensive, but are not direct incitement to violence. If someone says, Mr. So-and-so, who lives at 23 Acacia Avenue, Plymouth, is a fanatical Islamist, and people should feel free to go and knock his door down and beat the hell out of him. That's a clear incitement to violence, and that, of course, is not something that anyone should tolerate. That should be, that should, again, assuming someone who did something like that could be identified, they should be prosecuted for it. But if you post something saying, I think immigrants are not very good for this country and are somehow destroying the culture of this country, you don't have to agree with that. I don't agree with all of the sentiments expressed in that, but that's a statement of opinion, which as an expression, it may not be a legitimate argument, but as an expression of opinion, it is a legitimate expression. And I think, again, if we're going to start saying, as Claire says, actually, this kind of opinion is okay, and this kind of opinion is, 1, going to get you in prison, and 2, needs to be blocked by social media companies, and if social media companies don't do it, we're going to shut them down. That is the end of free speech. Look, there are so many great sayings on this, but probably most important is Orwell's that I'm paraphrasing, but it is only it's the right of free speech really only really operative when I'm allowed to say something that you find very, very offensive. That this is a necessary part of of the way in which our societies work. So I'm not in any way condoning people going out and arguing that people should go out and beat up Muslims. That kind of stuff should, of course, be apprehended, and indeed there should be measures taken against it. But this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the wider debate about and the wider freedom that you have to express opinions that other people may find very, very distasteful. We really need to be careful about making a very fine distinction between direct incitement to people to go out and do terrible things, to break the law, and expressions of opinion that some people may, for their own reasons, interpret as an invitation to go out and break the law.
It does feel that herein lies, Claire, I'll come to you in just a moment, but herein lies some of the criticism that we will no doubt receive this evening, that there's a kind of sense that we are talking in academic terms about something that is very much a real happening right now. 3 police officers have been injured in Plymouth as we're currently on air, that Muslims, black and brown people in Britain are talking about feeling really scared as their places of worship are attacked, as a children's library in Liverpool is burnt down, and a hotel housing asylum seekers in Rotherham is attacked too. Is there a problem? Please do.
Well, I now I'm even more horrified. This idea that we're actually suggesting that if you're from an ethnic minority, that you don't need free speech, when the very opposite is the case. I mean, free speech is a universal right for everyone. And I've spent the last almost a year defending the right of people to go on and argue, have pro-Gaza encampments on universities and defending their right to demonstrate. But guess what? I find their views very offensive, often anti-Semitic, but I've defended their right to protest, right? So I think that this idea, and of course, many of the groups around the pro-Gaza march is only for white people, is so patronizing and condescending and dangerous and racializes the very situation. I would say that's inflammatory, a statement before we even start. I also think, by the way, that we have to, we've got to keep our eye on what's going on. You've said that these terrible things are happening in Plymouth. That's not because of free speech. It's because people have gone out and acted, if they have, illegally, and they should be dealt with by the law. The speech isn't the problem. You can hear people say inflammatory things and you don't have to react to it. People say things all the time to me. You don't go, we're not automatons that just follow instructions. And so that's why, as Jerry pointed out, the law is very clear that incitement is a very specific and narrow form of crime. And when people are incited directly, they do face the full force of the law. But you were talking about what's happening in Plymouth. I've been following, just because I've got mates there, what's happening in Birmingham. And I don't know if you've been following the Sky News reporters there, where in fact a big group of what they're calling themselves the Muslim Defence League have turned out, or they drove the Sky journalists off the streets there. LBC reporters have also reported that they were so scared they had to leave. Apparently that was because that they believed that there might be, or that somebody had told them from their group that there was going to be groups of these EDL protesters arriving, but they haven't turned up at all. It's only one group, and there's mayhem on the streets. Now, what I think we've got to be serious about is we are living through something which is not just sparked up because somebody saw a meme on X or because of social media, because of deep-seated problems of a racially divided society that has been long time coming, I'm afraid, based around things like identity politics and issues that we need to have a serious conversation about, a proper grown-up public conversation about why people worry about migrants in hotels, why people feel that they've been lied to, as Matthew Syed said on this channel this morning, and in the Times newspaper about immigration by successive governments, and they feel resentful and ignored, and they want to have this discussion. You're not going to be able to have that civil conversation, that proper, frank conversation, if we clamp down on free speech. It will simply make things worse, and it will exacerbate things.
Sorry to interrupt, Claire, but just a quick point before we take a short break. Yeah. Is the time for that discussion now, as we are currently seeing scenes in Plymouth, as you describe the situation in Birmingham, unrest across the country? Is that grown-up conversation to be had right now?
Well, I'm trying. I assume that you're trying to have it now with us, aren't you? And I don't think that you can say that, oh, well, we're able to have it and nobody else is. I would expect and anticipate that we can. Now, by the way, I have been advocating and still advocate that people who participated in the riots, people who chased after people for no other reason that they were Muslims in a local area, people who burnt those hotels, they should face, because they committed terrible crimes, the full force of the law. We all agree on that. But trying to say that you can't say that because it might inflame the situation, or you can't say that because it might be misinformation, and calling on, I'm not the one who's calling on, it's the government that said this, and commentators who are saying there should be a clamp down on what is said online. And I think Jerry and I are saying that's going to make things worse. I wrote a book called I Find That Offensive a few years ago, because the crisis of free speech, I think, has been, and the undermining and attacks on free speech have partly contributed to this sense that people feel that they are being silenced and can't openly discuss issues as we should be able to in a free democratic society. So I don't think clamping down on it because of what's happened will help. It'll just make them go underground to Telegram, and it turns some of the more unsavory bad faith actors into free speech martyrs while they're at it.
I'm very concerned about this immediate rush to blame social media, and of course the implication of that being, it seems, and you more or less heard it directly there from James Ball, to somehow shut down people on social media. I do find it slightly chilling that actually that you can be, as he put it, guilty of committing a crime sitting at your keyboard. Look, of course, nobody wants to in any way encourage behavior that is an incitement to violence, an incitement to racial hatred or any other sort of hatred. And of course, there should be laws that restrict that. But I think this is an example of how we have got a particular type of person in this country, and I have to say here in the United States too, as gets carried away with this kind of illiberal authoritarianism that anything we don't want, we think that is wrong, or people should not be saying, they should, that is actually insupportable, they should somehow be either actually physically prevented from doing that by some sort of restrictions on their ability to share it online, or again, as you heard there, they should be prosecuted for doing it. I'm very worried about this. If I'm a very much a libertarian. I'm very much a free believer in very, very liberal approach to free speech, not just as a matter of principle, but actually because in the end, it's the only way really to combat speech that you don't like, speech that is wrong, speech that is actually hateful, is actually to expose it, and to expose it to as wide an audience actually in a way as possible, to demonstrate actually that it is hateful. And so I think, if you drive this stuff underground, if you tell people, and by the way, where do you draw the line? You draw that, so I've heard people saying that Elon Musk today should somehow be stopped because he tweeted, say, posted on X something about, a civil war seems inevitable. I mean, how is that exactly, an illegal act, or an act that's going to somehow destroy the social fabric of Britain? So you push this so far, you push this kind of speech underground. You make people even more resentful of the system. They feel that they are being prevented from expressing their views, their legitimate views, and you actually increase the tendency towards radicalization and extremism. So I'm very, very much against this illiberal idea that everybody who's out there somehow, again, let me be clear, I do not condone anybody out there spreading racist ideas, racist sentiments, or anything like that. I believe very firmly the best way to deal with that is to expose it, to expose its obnoxiousness, its antisocial expression, but not to formally ban it or somehow to send those people to jail for doing it. I think that is both wrong and likely to be very counterproductive.
Claire, should those whose opinions we may find distasteful, people sharing racist comments online, be allowed to say whatever they want online? Where is the line, and where do you draw it?
So I have to say that, here to Jerry on practically everything he said. First of all, we now immediately have gone from, firstly, we heard from the government that they were going to go after anyone who tweeted or whatever it is, posted anything that was disinformation. And now it becomes anything that's hateful. And we have to appreciate that a lot of these categories are subjective on the one hand, and we're all people who are commentators, one way or another, work in the media or in politics. And there are all sorts of people who could accuse, journalists of saying the wrong thing. So we should be very careful, as Jerry has indicated, that we don't allow this terrible, devastating set of circumstances associated with these riots to be used in an authoritarian way to curtail freedoms of living in a free society. We do need to be cautious of that. And it's interesting because it's just assumed, well, anybody who's putting out disinformation or misinformation, on the one hand, we hear, well, it might have something to do with foreign governments. It's a kind of Russian bot problem. And no doubt the Secret Service can keep their eye on that. And that's worth understanding and noting. But it's also the case that I do remember, maybe because I was a Leave voter, that we were told that the only reason that the majority voted in 2016 to leave the European Union was because of Russian bots. I also know that this is kind of a bit one-sided. We've heard about two-tier policing. There's also two-tier ways of understanding mis or disinformation. So you have a situation where, in the heat of the terrible scenes that we were seeing from the riots yesterday, leading members of Hope Not Hate put out a post saying that there was gangs of racists going around throwing acid at Muslim women. I mean, I was so shocked and horrified. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And I was thinking, oh my God, this is awful. Anyway, it wasn't true. It was disinformation. It was misinformation. And I'm not suggesting that Hope Not Hate are rounded up and prosecuted. I'm sure that they didn't mean to do it or they weren't trying to stir it up, but there will be people who'll have run with that and they used it to say and draw all sorts of conclusions about what was happening. So I think we have to also ask the question, who would make the decision about what was allowed to be posted? We saw during the lockdown period a lot of what was labeled dis or misinformation by authorities and actually with the government having a disinformation unit who were effectively keeping tabs on commentators for saying things which went against the mainstream narrative. It then ended up that some of those pieces of information, for example, the Wuhan lab leak theory, was not, some foreign disinformation campaign or a lie or malignant, but actually is more likely to be the closer reason for why we had COVID in the first place. So I absolutely agree with Jerry. Can we not rush to turn what is already a very difficult social situation into a censorious clampdown on people finding out what's going on? And the final thing I'd say is, by the way, one thing that's been good about having the social media public square in existence is you can correct mistakes fairly quickly too. You can actually show that things are lies and malevolent and wrong. And so the ability to argue back is part of free speech. And you can show up mistruths that way, not give the bosses of social media companies an excuse to remove things.